Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar. Today we're going to be joined by two guests with us today to unpick player insight into finishing the attack and then start to really dig deep into its implications for practice design. So just before I introduce the two guests that we've got with us today, just some key outcomes that we're going to go after throughout the webinar. The first one in particular is going to be gaining some on-pitch insight into the actual game demands when finishing the attack, and I think that's where the guests today are going to really support us with that real on-pitch insight. The second outcome is interpreting the position-specific detail. So what is it around the number 9 that's really needed to find some solutions to those demands that we've highlighted in key outcome 1? And then the third one is then utilising the game demands and the position-specific detail, which we know from outcomes 1 and 2, and then really try and replicate that into some game demands and practices that will bring to life some of that stuff to support our players. So without further ado, we'll then move on to introducing the two guests. So Jodie, Twose, thanks very much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Jodie, do you just want to give us an insight into your playing experience? I know that you probably don't need much introduction to most people, but if you'd like to just give us a little bit of an insight.
Yeah, sure. So I am an England Lioness player. I have over 50 caps for England seniors. Currently, I am at Olympique Lyonnais in France. We just recently won the Champions League. So yeah, my career, I've spent a lot of it abroad. I started at Tranmere Rovers growing up, but at 18, I went over to America to college on a scholarship. And I think ever since then, I kind of got the traveling bug, and I've played in a number of different countries, USA, obviously, back in England for a while, played in Sweden, played in Australia, and now France.
Fantastic. Good stuff. And Twose, do you want to just introduce yourself?
Yeah, no problem. Hi, guys. Geraint Twose. I've worked at Cardiff City Academy for best part of 17 years, working in the development and professional phase. Over the last 7 years, I've worked for the FA as an FAYCD, so I work in club football within the men's game, but also been really fortunate over the past 5 years to support the senior women's team, which has been an unbelievable experience. And I had the pleasure of coaching players such as Jodie, which has been, again, unbelievable, challenging and beneficial experience, I've got to say, in terms of sort of my progression as a coach. And something that really fascinates me is how we can develop players within the development phases of youth development, and also the professional performance end with senior players and international players. And I know a lot of the listeners today will be working in both sections. So fascinating to draw out as much gold as from Jodie as we can.
Yeah, absolutely. And unpicking your relationship as well, Twose, and sort of the insight that you know around Jodie as well, and on and off pitch will be a great insight. I suppose, Jodie, just to kind of kick us off, really, it's clear that from your experiences, you've had a vast array of experiences across different countries and played under some great managers, worked with some great coaches, and recently around some fantastic players. How have you had to adapt to the different ways that all the different teams actually finish the attack, the styles and strategies that they use? How have you had to adapt throughout your different teams?
Yeah, I've had to adapt quite a lot through my career. I think it started at quite a young age when I went to the US at age 18. That was just a big culture shock in general, on and off the pitch. But I think from a young age, I probably realised, well, there isn't just one way of playing the game. So I think from going to America, so they were a lot fitter. The mentality was different to growing up, and I think throughout the different countries I've played in, and even within countries at different teams with the different philosophies, different styles of play, you really do have to adapt. You're adapting to what the philosophy is or the style of play. How does the coach want to play? How does the coach want you to play? Building those relationships and that chemistry with players on the pitch too. It takes time. But I think as I've gone through my career, I think you realise the importance of adapting quickly if you want to play and be successful.
Mm-hmm. And how does that look then with teams that you've played in? Let's say that that dominate possession and are really sort of dominant teams versus teams where you've had to battle and work really hard? How has that changed your role in the team?
Yeah, it's changed massively, actually. I think some of it's down to my strengths as a player and what comes natural in some teams, and then in other environments it's a bit more challenging. So I'd say a lot of my career, especially early on, up until probably the last few years, I've been in teams where the style's a little bit more direct, a lot more space, a bit more transitional, obviously with the US League and playing in Australia, and even teams that I've played for in England when I played for Birmingham, for instance. The style's a bit more little through balls, taking advantage of space, exploiting space, really forward, thinking forward playing, as opposed to probably the last few years I've found, but almost finding the higher level that I play at and the so-called better teams I play for, and almost the game's evolved to a more possession-based game. It has changed the way I've had to play. It's changed, where goal scoring opportunities are coming from. There's no longer any space in behind. Formation changes as well. I've played 4-4-2 a lot of my career, and then changed to a 4-3-3 and kind of how that looks as a forward. So I've definitely had to adapt and change depending on the context of the environment that I've been in.
Perfect. And I suppose, Tuesday, just bringing you into that, you'll have witnessed some change firsthand, especially internationally with difference in managers and difference in styles, and the blueprint for success just recently coming in and starting to be implemented. How have you seen Jodie adapt, or how have you helped to support that adaptation throughout that time?
Yeah, I think in terms of working with the players and designing practices for the players, which we'll come on to a bit later, the style is massively important. So how the types of practices that we put on, particularly for strikers like Jodie, really have to link to the types of players they are and the style of football that we play in. And certainly there was a shift in our styles. I think in 2017 in the Euros, Jodie, when you won the Golden Boot, there was a lot more opportunities on transition and certainly in behind back lines. I mean, you're the types of runs you make off shoulders in behind defensive lines to get onto through balls was really prevalent, and I think a lot of your goals came from the style at that time. In more recent times, it's more possession based. So as Jodie was talking about, then there's less space behind the back line, but there is still space. It's just not as big, So Jodie had to almost adapt the types of runs that she'd be making. So, is it that little threaded 8, 9, 10 yard ball in behind the back line off the edge of the box, or is it previously where there might be a 30, 40 yards through ball, like the good goal you scored against Holland, if you remember, Joe, that you got on the end of. And yeah, it's so Jodie definitely sort of had to adapt to that style of play. I think you mentioned something when you spoke previously, Joe, which was really interesting in terms of how you had to focus more on finishing from crosses as well, because as teams now were getting to low blocks, you sort of trying to go around and behind. So he was getting on the end of crosses or getting on the end of cutbacks. Whereas previously, a lot of the goals might be more central, where you're getting down the sides of centre backs.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point that as well, because we've just done some data analysis on the WSL and how heavily crosses are now starting to feature in build-up plays and assists for goals, which there was a myth a couple of years back that crossing doesn't feature in the women's game, and it's not part of it. When actually now that's starting to become more and more prevalent, and strikers such as Jodie and yourself, you're having to adapt to that and have different techniques and things. And I suppose a question based off the back of that then is, moving across these different teams and having to adapt continuously, there must be times where you get to a point where you have a goal drought and things start to dry up a little bit and you start to question yourself a little bit. And have you got to a point where you've had spells without goals? And I suppose, how have you managed that, and how have coaches and people around you supported you manage that?
Yeah, I think it's natural to kind of go up and down with scoring goals. Had it quite a lot in my career. I think, as I've got older and more experienced, you realise it's part of the game. But I think early on in my career, it felt like it was the end of the world and I was never going to score a goal ever again. I think the importance is just consistency with it. I've found when maybe I haven't scored for a few games for whatever reason, we're not creating or missing chances, you end up tensing up and overthinking things and, just not playing natural. So it's just staying relaxed and staying consistent and, not all of a sudden I'm staying out for an hour taking 200 shots because I missed a couple of chances, So I do think it's just being consistent and knowing that it's part of the game, and you will score a goal again eventually.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything you can remember, particularly with coaches and managers, that they've supported you on with that externally to support your confidence and things? Anything in particular that stands out for you?
Yeah, there's a couple of teams I played for. One in particular is when I was at Washington Spirit. So I just after college, I'd come back to Europe to play, and I went back to play pro in the US League. And it was a transition, getting used to the pace of the game, and they were talking about it, having to adapt. And I probably went 5 or 6 matches without scoring a goal, and I was starting to panic a bit. Like I knew what I was capable of, and you get worried. But the manager at the time, Mark Parsons, he was great with me. He's shown belief, he's shown confidence. He kept playing me, which I think was a big thing for me. It could have been quite easy for him to maybe think, oh, she's not good enough, or she's, I want to play somebody else. And he stuck with me, and that for me really gave me confidence and belief. And then eventually, when I ended up getting my first goal, I did relax a little bit, and then a lot more goals came. And I think that situation, if he had handled that differently, I probably would have knocked my confidence. I probably wouldn't have had the season that I had. So I do think as a coach and a manager, you have an important role with helping players through maybe spells with no goals and just people's confidence and belief in general.
Mm-hmm. Susie, anything to add on to that from your perspective?
Yeah, I just think from a coach's point of view, we've just got to be there. We've just got to be there for the players. So if they're going through a spell where they're not feeling confident, it's just for us to do as much as we can to help them. So, in Jodie's case, for example, her attitude and attention to detail is absolutely first class. So, as much as she wouldn't want to stay out doing 200 extra shots, for example, because you've got to, you've got to manage the loads, etc. She would always be seeking opportunities to do extra work. So I think how we can support, and I think it's an important point, is how we then liaise with the NDT team as well, because we want to get players extra time on the grass. The players want extra time on the grass. So how do we liaise with the S&C department, for example, to maximise training time, but also manage player load so they're ready to perform on match day? Linked with that, analysis, linking with the analysis and the goalkeeping department in terms of, I know Jodie does a lot of this in terms of reviewing opposition goalkeepers, reviewing opportunities, reviewing previous goals that they've scored. Because I think the one thing with confidence is your ability and instinct to score goals and quality to score goals is always there. You can't lose faith in that. So I think from a coaches and MDV and the MDT staff point of view is just to be there and provide as much support as we possibly can, support and belief.
Yeah. Perfect. And I think that'll lead us really nicely into the next bit, where we're just going to get into some real detail, really, and probably unpick your brains, Jodie, of what you're seeing, what you're feeling, your thoughts in some different videos. So we've got 2 videos in particular that showed two different goals, 2 different types of goals that we're going to play through. And if you could just really just tell us about what you're seeing, what you're thinking, and Susie, if anything that you want to add and jump into, please do.
Yeah, no problem.
This one here was obviously.
Yeah, so this was when I played. This is when I played for Arsenal, and like I mentioned before, a very possession-based team. Probably felt quite challenging where the opportunities were coming from. But this was probably a rare occasion where I actually was able to get in behind the back line and get an opportunity on goal that I would consider as like my bread and butter. So if we play it through, for the moment, I just skipped. Can you go back a little bit? Yeah. Right, so as it goes through here, I'm just kind of waiting to see the build up, what's happening. As soon as it gets to our number 10 here, Danielle van der Donk. So I can see that she's got a lot of time, she's got a lot of space, she's faced up. And when I'm playing as a centre forward, a lone striker, I'm always trying to be in between the centre backs. And I typically like to be on the opposite side centre back, almost make her think that she's marking me, because ultimately I want to exploit the space in between the ball side centre back. So that straight ball diagonal run for me is what I'm looking for. So, in this situation, as the play builds up, I see she's turned, I see that she's got time and space. And then for me, it's about the timing of the run and the timing of the pass that she plays through. And then I take a quick look to see where the goalkeeper is. I see there's a huge space to the left and see her rushing out, which allows me to finish it first time.
Yeah, perfect. And if we just go back onto that again, you can see how your position in particular sort of narrows off. So they've gone from being quite wide as two centre-halves. You can see there Kez checking over her shoulder, narrowing off because she can see where you are, starts to sort of narrow off with that second centre-half. And then as she's looking at the ball and not actually looking at you, that's when you start to then exploit her and get in behind and run off that back shoulder. And I think that you can see that what you said there around that little check and scan as the ball's coming through to check the goalkeeper and then selecting the right type of finish. Susie, anything on that you can see?
Yeah, loads, mate. It's a great goal, isn't it? I think we speak about relationships. So the timing of the run and the weight and timing of the pass is perfect. So if you freeze there, if you just go back a touch and play and freeze. So with any sort of combinations like this where they're central or wide, and particularly work with younger players as well, is to get strikers to attack at the space at pace. So you're arriving at maximum pace in that space so the defenders can't recover. But the timing and preparation that goes before that is really complex. And Jodie just described it really naturally, but it's actually difficult, because if Jodie goes a second too early or too late, she either doesn't get there or she's caught offside,
Mm-hmm.
From a training perspective, how we build those relationships with a player in terms of types of practice we provide is also really important. And we touch on it later, but when we're doing finishing practice in training, even if we haven't got defenders, the use of offside lines is absolutely key, because without it, how do you ever get the timing of those runs? So I think it's a really good clip. And you spoke about styles earlier, Jordan. That's a similar run that you might have made in 2017. Only in 2017, the margin of error for the passer was greater because you had maybe 30 or 40 yards to pass into. As the style changes and becomes more possession-based and teams are dropping into a lower back line, it's the same sort of pass and the same sort of run, but it's a lot tighter. So the margin of error now is a lot less,
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a great clip, and that time of the run sums you up, mate. It's a great goal.
And on that too, I just want to highlight the importance of the relationships with the players around you. So I know from training with this player, DVD, at the time, she knew that's the type of ball that I like. She knew what my strengths was as a player, and we had a lot of conversations around it and a lot of trial and error, of course. But I think that the pleasing thing for me, the context of playing for Arsenal, was the manager at the time didn't like us playing this way, and yet she still saw where the space was. She still, was a top caliber player. She recognised it was a goal scoring opportunity, and I guess within herself had the freedom to play the ball that was on, because at times, especially in this team, players were a bit scared because if say the timing wasn't right, I ran offside or the ball ran through, you can guarantee the manager on the side would have been going mad. But it's nice building those relationships with players and the connection, those conversations, because ultimately we are the players, and you have to make those decisions in the moment, and knowing each other's strengths and weaknesses. And this is a great clip that highlights that.
Yeah, perfect. and we'll just be able to see it through again, just slow motion, just to sort of finish that off, for everyone to piece that together as they're watching. But it's clear that you're clearly having a plan there as the ball's deep and starting to think about the shift of your movement, and then, as Twosey's saying there, just that powerful movement into that space. Can finish.
Just another point before we go on to the next clip, Cass, I think it's important as well when you talk about relationships. So that's also from a central area. The goal you scored in the World Cup against Argentina, Jodie, which is actually from a cross, isn't it? But the concept's the same. You were right, but absolute pace, you know, so you're right in that space as fast as you can. So the time is perfect, and the defender can't get there. Can you remember?
Exactly. And and it's the same. You know, it was Beth Mead that played the ball through, and she was my roommate at the World Cup. And just from training, we try it. I'd be telling her, not particularly my strength in comparison to the goals we're seeing today. But still, it's that space between the goalkeeper and the back line for me. With those runs, that's where I'll be more effective. So having those conversations with her, we try it at training, maybe doesn't quite come off. Some goals you score, some you don't. And then when it came into the actual match where they were sitting in a low block, it was a really frustrating game. Yeah. We essentially had one opportunity or match, and we were on the same page. You know, we both knew where we wanted to put the ball and what was a dangerous area, and we ended up obviously scoring from it.
Yeah. Well, I think that leads us really nicely into this goal, because this goal in particular is brilliant, and you can see the relationships between everyone on the pitch, and especially you and Keats there in the final third. So we'll play it through for people to have a little look at, and we'll go back through.
Yes, this was for a World Cup qualifying match against Russia. We played two strikers, two up front. If we can just stop it there.
Yeah.
So before we get into the detail of the actual the through ball, the finish, and the details surrounding that, I just want to make a point about kind of what's going through my mind, or what I'm thinking as the play's building. So where it is right now, I'm not really going to receive the ball. I'm not really going to score a goal from here, but it's more what information I'm taking in. So if you can play it through, I'm kind of walking, I'm checking my shoulder, I'm scanning, I'm trying to see where are they in relation to where the ball is, where's the space, what's building. So as much as I'm not really moving and players are moving around me, I'm starting to think, right, okay, what's building, what's going to happen here, and just taking in, taking those pictures, scanning, and just trying to take as much information in as possible.
Yeah, I think what's a really good observation here, Joe, is as you're doing that, how you're changing your body orientation and positioning all the time in relation to the ball, where the ball is, where the defenders are, changing of your hips, changing of your feet, weight distribution between the two, almost continuously searching and waiting for that moment for the ball to be in a position where you can then exploit. I think that's a really good observation from watching it there. And as you can see now, you've just started to change your hips as the ball's starting to come a little bit higher up the pitch. And what are you thinking now as you're starting to pull away from the defenders in there?
Well, I'm trying to be on the back shoulder of the centre back, with it being a 2v2. Keats has occupied the other one. I think the next angle shows it really well. At the moment, am I an option to feet, because I don't know if she's going to need me to feet. I don't know what the pressure's what's kind of built, but I'm being an option there. And then as soon as Fran, okay, stop it there. So as soon as our number 10 receives the ball, for me, this is the position I love to be in. 2v2 with the centre backs. Okay, that they are quite narrow, they're playing quite packed, but I like to be on the back shoulder, the outside shoulder, not too far that the fullback's going to pick me up and make it a 2v1, but enough that it's going to be difficult for the centre back to see the ball and to see where I am. Mm-hmm. So as it comes into Fran, I'm just waiting to see. I'm half being an option if she needs me to feet, like I just said. If she is under a lot of pressure and needs that bounce pass, I'm there. If you just play it through, as she turns and Keats comes into the space, I can start to recognise what's happening. I can see she's took a first time touch. She's going to get past her player. Keats has already come to be an option to feet, and I can see the players. She's just about to drag the centre back out, so I can see that there I'm pointing. I know where I want the ball, and that's where the little shift of my hips and shift of movement are to try and get in behind.
And I think, George, just on that there, how important is it, the distance? So you said obviously the distance not too far to get too close to the fullback. How much is importance on the distance of that disconnect from the centre back? Because you've pulled away from her, disconnected there. How far is too far, and how close is too close for that?
I think it depends on her movement and what she does, and in relation to where you are or where the ball is as well. You know, I think pulling off, she didn't really shift too much, but the back line's flat, that there's enough space to get in behind. I think, you know, if I had checked her feet and she came with me, then straight away I probably maybe would have moved sooner and there would have been a bit more space in behind. But yeah, I think it really depends on where the ball is in the moment. And it like, I want to highlight that point again about the fullback. If I was a few yards close to the fullback would have picked me up, and this whole situation wouldn't have happened. But yeah, I think Keith's movement to try and check to feet, the centre back didn't go with her enough, or it didn't go too much, but it was enough for the ball, you know, to create the space for Fran to play the through ball in.
Yeah, perfect. And then you get through to this, and then this is where your psych element takes over, Jordan. You 1v1 with the keeper, and there's that pressure on then to put it in the back of the net. So what are you thinking as the ball's come through? Because as it's come through at the moment, you haven't taken any touch so far, and I know you take a little touch. So what are you thinking as it's come through?
Well, I think because the space was a little tight, Fran kind of had to zip the pass through. I think the next clip shows it really well. She had to put a bit of pace on it in order to get it through. I think the goalie did a good job of staying on her feet and not flying out, because I think if she flew out, I would have been able to have, took a shot first time. But I think with the pace of the pass and the goalkeeper not coming, I didn't feel like I could have hit it first time. So as it came in, obviously took a little look to see where she was. She stayed on her feet. She stayed tall. I actually think she made it quite difficult for me in that moment. Like, I had to make that decision. She didn't help me make it. So when I first took that touch, I think it froze her, and then I felt a bit more in control of the situation.
Twose, anything from you, just watching that through and knowing Jod?
Yeah, two things really. I mean, the movement away from the centre back is really important, and Jodie made a brilliant point about going too far across the pitch, I guess, towards the full back. But coming down the pitch is important. Like the question you asked, Kels, and all you're trying to do is just put doubt in the centre back's mind. So Jodie could drop another yard and get the ball into her feet and then face the centre back up. Or if the centre back comes tight, you can spin and go in behind. And we work on that all the time in training. And these mannequins get a bad prep for training, but at times you can use them. Ideally, you want defenders in there. But even if we're working off mannequins, we're always talking about just that step and opening your shoulder, just to put some doubt in the centre back's mind. And we needed to be developing nines as Jodie can, to be able to drop and get off turn and face them up as well, as well as going ducking behind, because then you're causing centre backs all sorts of problems. So those consistent, subtle messages, even if you're just doing a technical finishing practice about just coming a yard, 2 yards off the centre back to then go and dive in behind it is really important. And on the finish, for me, what really stands out is the fact you take a touch, is the composure in that area. How often you might see players just try and swing their left foot to it now, but just so composed to take that extra touch.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just going to play through again, just so we can see it, just so everyone can sort of add all those things together while they watch it.
Yeah.
But
again, I stress the importance of the relationships with the players. Like, I know Fran Kirby is unbelievable on the ball, and when she was receiving that ball from Jordan Nobbs under pressure, you just know her qualities are to turn, and her vision and ability to play through balls. And I think that's almost worked like clockwork. And we knew what each other wanted. Whereas if that was a different player in there, if that was a Jill Scott, for instance, probably would have changed what I would have done. But knowing your players and having that connection with them, it just makes it so much easier.
Yeah, definitely. And I think now, sort of bringing that into a little bit of data now, what the what the trends of the game are currently telling us, and we're going to unpick this from a little bit of data that we did in relation to the WSL in last season, 1920, and as we know, it was cut short, so unfortunately didn't get the full season, but it's told us so much about the demands of the game and the current context of the women's game. And we managed to get 259 goals in total. 72% of those open play, 28% of them set play goals, and we're going to look particularly at the open play goals in particular and dig deeper into those. And as you can see there, that the inside the box, outside the box, it seems to be that the trend is going closer and closer towards inside the box. And as Jodie's saying there and alluded to earlier, teams are having to work harder to create goal scoring opportunities now, and the ball's getting closer and closer to the goal in order to do so. And you can see just from the trends of last season just to this season, in 7 game weeks of this season that we've collected, that the goal scoring average per game's gone up. So there's more goals that are being scored and more opportunities to finish. So we're just going to start to unpick some of these goals in particular. The open play goals are 72% there that we've looked at. So if we have a look at the shot location of goals and the assist locations, just looking at those in particular, it's clear that the second 6-yard box, that 38% there of shot location is quite dominant. Jodie, in terms of your attributes as a striker, then either as a single or playing as a double in a 4-4-2, where likely would you like to get shots from? Like, where would you look to sort of attack and get into based on your own individual capabilities? What types of areas would you like to get into?
I would say between lanes 2 and 4. I'd say a lot of my goals come from within the box, around the second 6-yard box, probably around the penalty spot. Anywhere really within zones 2 to 4, lanes 2 to 4.
Yeah. And Susie, looking at that, and especially looking at the assist locations for those goals, how would that look different if the player's sort of serving up to Jodie? I know she alluded to this in the previous clip, but for example, if that was Jodie compared to Ellen, or if Fran was on the ball or Beth was on the ball, how would this look different versus what remains consistent for you as a team? What do you try and do consistently?
Well, the big things we always work on, and Jodie just mentioned there, the lanes. A majority of our goals come from lanes 2, 3, and 4. So we do a lot of combination work in and around those areas. The relationships with those different types of players is absolutely key, as you mentioned. And the other thing I think is really important with assists and the importance of these relationships is we speak about being ruthless in the final third. And people look at being ruthless as the actual finish, but I think the final ball is probably as important. So part of being ruthless is the assist, is the quality of that final ball before the chance even comes. And I think looking at certainly the 2 clips that you just showed there, like the relationship you had with the players in and around the 9, in and around lanes 2, 3, and 4. Was absolutely key, but that point about the final ball, I think I really want to stress. I don't know what your thought is on this, Joe, but those potential opportunities that get missed just because the weight of the pass isn't right, or the cross isn't right, or the relationship between the 2 players isn't right, is something that I think is really important. Joe, would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. I think a lot of my goals I've scored, say the golden boot that I got at the Euros, if it wasn't for the quality of the service of the players, I wouldn't have been scoring those goals. I wouldn't have been winning a golden boot. That's the fact of the matter. It really is. And, I think there's times where I could go into games and say, well, I would have scored a hat-trick today if they would have played it earlier. And it really is about the timing of the pass. The goals, that were the clips we've seen today, if the players took an extra touch or the weight of the pass, the quality of the pass wasn't there, there'd be no goal scoring opportunity at all. There'd be no shot on goal. So I'm a big believer in what you're saying about the ruthlessness. Everyone always focuses on the final finish. For me, that's the easy part. It's actually creating that chance and, the pass appreciation, I'd call it as well. It's just the quality surrounding that is what makes a goal.
Yeah.
And I suppose delving into both of you really, and for both of you to maybe answer this question would be, how do you go about developing them relationships? Because a lot of practices we see will be 2 18-yard boxes on top of each other, loads of repetition of finishing, loads of emphasis on the finish, but not necessarily the relationship or the quality of pass, etc. So how do we go about even doing that?
For me, it is at training. I think training, being able to be in realistic situations and scenarios that you're going to face in the match, but also the conversations between players too, and ultimately, as coaches, giving your players the freedom to read each other, the triggers and the cues, and to know what each other's strengths are. I think, of course, it's important as a coach to know your players' strengths and weaknesses, but it's even more important for your players to know that. So the goals I've scored in those clips shows that the players on the ball know where I want the ball. I know where they're going to play it. So it's so important that it comes out through training and conversations.
Yeah, and 100%. And I think in training, it's the consistency of the messages that align to our style and the type of players that we have. So, these stats are really helpful in terms of, based around your team. So if we know where we're going to get most of the goals from based on these stats, and that really helps us shape our work in practice. It's 3 key things I always work on and working on sessions. It's got to be 1 about our style, 2 about the player, and then 3 about the opposition. We're looking at the opposition, what they will give us. So we know the types of players, the types of goals we will score based on the types of players we got. We know what our style will look like. I think where the analysts in particular come in really effective for us is narrowing our focus down even more.
Mm-hmm.
So you might look at a map like you got on the screen there, but it'll be based around 18. So it might look slightly different from team to team. So what are they going to give us to allow us to be us in terms of our style? So when we work through that process, the messages are always consistent in training, and the more consistent we get those messages, the more practices we design to allow those principles to come out, the bigger relationships we'll build between players.
Yeah, really good point. And I think it leads us really nicely into the next slide around how do these assists and shot locations sort of get added together. So if you look at the assists there in sort of the midfield third, if you like, or your own half, and what the goals scored might look like from assists from that location compared to lanes 2 and 4, and how the technique of that finish and how everything that surrounds the finish would look differently. Even just looking at Jodie's 2 finishes in particular, how different they are, and the different techniques and the different things that she's got to think about. And if you look at this here, we've got the type of finish and what was most prevalent in the data. The strike 35%, so that would be laces and striking through the ball. Instep we classed as sort of the inside of the foot, that sort of pass shot, if you like. And then you've got the volley and the header. So just sort of looking at that really now, it's starting to think about, and I know, Twose, we've had conversations about this around what do we serve up for our players? Do we serve them up consistently ones that will be presented and what it looks like versus that development of serving up a variety at different points? George, what's your take on that in terms of a player? Do you like consistency and like to work on the ones that you're going to see regular, or do you have ones just in case?
I like a variety. I think obviously it's important to work on what you're going to face in the game. I think that is the most important. However, goals come from all different areas, and for me, I like to be challenged on finishes. I like to mix it up, variety, whether that's like little scrappy balls, especially when we talk about the game changing and having to adapt. I find now as a centre forward, especially when playing for Lyon, we play against the block a lot of the time. It's more, bouncing balls, second balls, following in the goalkeeper, more reaction chances, and I'm finishing from crosses, obviously. So, yeah, it's nice to have a variety in training.
Mm-hmm. Twose, what's your thoughts on that, serving it up as a coach?
Again, links what we spoke about earlier around, your principles. So we serve in our practices that are really going to support us in the game and meet the needs of the game. Interesting looking at your stats there is the second 6-yard box, and I think it's a really, really important skill to try and get players to stay out, just to stay out and then arrive at pace, as we said, or even stand still, because a lot of the times, particularly from cutbacks, defenders will have a tendency to drop in and collapse into the goal to defend it, and at times centre forwards will go with them, but actually the space is just if you stand still, So while defenders are dropping in to defend the goal, that second 6-yard box is vacant. So teaching certainly younger players to recognise that and have the confidence to stand still in that space, and then hopefully we'll find you with a pass, or is it you may be running across the first defender to get the touch on the ball. You may be running off the back shoulder of the first defender to get on the pass in between. So again, your sessions have to really replicate that. In terms of sort of more individual stuff, I mean, Jodie's attitude to this kind of work, as you mentioned before, is first class, and I think it's a really important point when we work with younger players as well. Jodie will always work both sides. We'll always work left side as much as she wants to work right side. She'll always want scruffy finishes as well. So it's not always the perfect set and finish. She wants it bouncing into her. She wants one when she's got to take a touch. She wants ones over the shoulder where she's got to try and get on the end of it and strike a bouncing ball. And, the confidence to be able to do that, I think, is really important. From a youth development point of view, at times kids don't want to do it because they don't want to be seen to be trying something that's difficult, and they might not get it right at times. But Jodie has always, our attitude has always been, these are the types of finishes they need, because she understands that that's what they might come in the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I think that, again, it leads us on to this tactical considerations and trying to implement those into practice. And especially this stat that we've picked out from the WSL, and we start to look at where does possession occur from in the attacking third. So how do we gain possession? What's that usually look like? And you see there it's heavily weighted towards that transition. So, Jod, when your team's sort of out of possession and doesn't have the ball and looking to try and implement a strategy to win it back, what are you still thinking, even though your team doesn't have the ball, to exploit that transition when it happens?
Yeah, usually I'm always looking to see where the space will be and what opportunities might come about if we win the ball. A lot of the time it's down to what's happening in the match and the context of the game. Some games it could be close and you have more defensive responsibility. There's times where I've really had to drop really, really deep to help the team defensively, which changes probably more so than, if we know we're going to go for the transition, we need to get a goal. It'll probably change my position on the pitch, but ultimately I'm always thinking, right, if we win it, where's the space? Can I get it to feet? Will it build up? Where can I run? Where can I exploit the space?
Mm-hmm. And if you think about, obviously you with Lyon now, and probably a team that will have lots of possession, dominate possession, constantly in the ball, constantly moving. And then when you're out of possession, a high press, win it back. And there's lots of physical demand constantly. So how do you sort of help the team to speed up and slow down, especially when it's probably a lot of it's predominantly you in that attacking third area? How do you help support the team with that?
It can be difficult at times. If you expect it to high press and you're successful at high press, then we've got possession. Everything's just in the opposition's half. It can be tiring, and at times you almost need to give them a bit of a signal just to be like, relax. Or I think the easiest one is, as attacking players, you're just not showing for the ball. I think that says more than anything. If you're not an option to play forward, I don't think defenders and holding mids are going to pass it. So there's a really good understanding here, the times that we go and the times that we don't. And I find we have to be really patient at times as well. But to me, this links in with the transition, that when we actually do have an opportunity to win it higher up, when there is more space, then you have to take advantage of it. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, at times it can be a long game when teams are just sitting in a block and you have to go side to side all the time to try and break them down. It is those transition moments that you can make the most out of and exploit them and get goals.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point for coaches, really watching and listening, thinking about that tempo, because I think a lot of the time we drive, win the ball back, get towards goal as quick as possible, when actually just dictating that tempo, when's right to and when's not so right to, and when do we need to build and and just compose ourselves and find a different opportunity. I think that's really important for coaches to start to think about when that might occur in sort of their coaching and for their teams. And linking on to that as well, some further tactical considerations. When we dug deeper into sort of the emphasis of goals and what happened when scoring goals, not just from a technical aspect and where they're scored and what types of finishes, but we looked at the tactical considerations. And 73% of the time, when you score the first goal, you win the game. 82% of those first goals were scored in the first half. And 46% of them very first goals scored was scored in the first 15 minutes of games. So I think that tells us a lot about what we can start to emphasise potentially in practice, but also starting to think about, how can we take the data but not take it too literally. So I know, Jod, when we've had a chat, it was that how do you get the balance between the importance of the first goal, because that's really important, but also instilling some belief that when you go 1-0 down, you're still going to win the game. So what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, exactly. Of course, the game's about scoring the most goals, and typically, you do want to score the first goal, especially look at the situation here at Lyon. Teams sit in a really low block, and it's just get an early goal, because as soon as you get an early goal, everyone can relax. And there's games where it's 0-0 and the block's even deeper, and just you're losing patience, people losing their heads a little bit. So there is obviously importance of the first goal, but at the same time, I don't think you can overemphasize or overstress it, because this football, it happens. You're going to go a goal down, and I think it is getting the balance, because ultimately you don't want to go a goal down and your team absolutely crumbles because you've placed so much importance in getting that first goal. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I do think as a coach, you've got to have the balance of, stress, it's important to score early and get the first goal, but also don't overemphasize it.
Yeah.
I don't think it helps your players either.
Yeah. And just in terms of then your role as a substitute, that must look different, especially when you're 1-0 up already, or when you're 0-0, or you've been asked to come on and chase the game. How does that look from a substitute's perspective? Does your role change? Does your mindset change? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think you've got a big role as a sub, because it really depends on what the game needs. That's how I see it. I think there's games where I've come into matches where, give it the Champions League as an example. We're up 1-0, 2-1. It's a semi-final. It's a final of the Champions League. You're coming on as a sub. Yeah, I'm a forward. I want to score goals. I want to impress. But at the same time, you want to win the match and you want to win the Champions League. So, there's moments in games like that where I'm just running defensively, and you've got such a big role, really important role defensively with fresh legs to get the job done for the team ultimately. But equally, there's games where you're chasing a game and you're really being relied upon to score a goal. So it really does come down to what the game needs.
Yeah, and Twose, how do you manage that then in terms of a coach perspective, the subs and their importance, and keeping the confidence, keeping the morale, and ensuring, I suppose, they understand their role when they come onto the pitch, of that finishing the attack, but to either maintain a lead or to gain a lead or to sustain it?
Yeah, a couple of things really. I think in terms of the players that are not starting the game, particularly in tournaments and on camp, I'm a massive believer of the most important session, bar none, is match day +1, the day after the game, and how you look after the players then. And it has to be, that session's got to be challenging. It has to be valued by the player sort of individually, and it's also got a link to the next game, because it is a team game, and then the players who don't start the game are as important as the players who do. So having that sort of mentality to come on and affect the game and be a team player is massively important. And we'll always stress that when we're on camp, that focus on match day +1. In terms of the stats you're showing on the first goal, I think it's interesting as well, because the more teams that are dominating possession and coming up against low blocks, it's prepping them to be patient as well. So, believe and trust in the style. Don't go chasing the game if you haven't scored early. Trust that at some point we'll break them down. And I think 2 examples coming to mind of that, Jode, was the qualifier against Wales, where I think it took us an hour to get the first goal, but we'd spoken about it all week. and the goal you scored against Argentina, which was critical. We end up winning the game 1-0, and it comes after an hour, but it comes after an hour of dominating the ball, But it's just having that patience that it will come from a striker's point of view, and you comment on this more than me, Joe, is staying in the game, staying concentrated and focused in the game, knowing that chance will come, and I want to be ready.
Yeah, and I think throughout the whole webinar, really, we've tried to relate it back, one, to the pitch and the players, which Georgie's, really supported us with and really give us an insight on the pitch. And I know, Twose, we've sort of alluded to then practices and how we get this out for practices and players. So in terms of sort of practice design and practice considerations, what types of things do you put on for the players then, or some examples that you give the players, such as Jodie, Ellen, etc., on camp that will support some of these considerations we've gone through throughout the webinar?
Yeah, and I show some examples here. I think we're gonna play the examples now.
Yeah.
Here we go. I think I can control it here. And what's important is these are just considerations. So when we spoke about showing a session, it's not about showing a full session for me. It's showing examples of considerations around your style and your player. And like I mentioned earlier, whenever I'm designing practice, it's about three things: us, which is the style; the player, the types of player they are; and the opposition. And the only thing around the opposition is what are they going to give us for us to be us? Whether it's just trying to identify opportunities that we can exploit. So these are just like simple examples of adaptations, I guess, we use in training. So if you look at just a quick example here. So in the bottom corner, right, we work off think forward, play forward, control of patience, then think forward, play forward. Now the rationale behind that is, and you mentioned transition earlier, we keep in possession to play forward. So we want to play forward as much as we possibly can. So we have to replicate those sessions to consistently sell that message. So Jodie laughed at this because I always use it in training. I always use 6 passes as a goal, or a goal as a goal. Right? If we're doing just a possession practice, if you're doing a rondo, it's always that rule, we try to make it as directional as much as we possibly can, because we want to get that understanding of we're only passing the ball here for opportunities to try and penetrate and play forward, which again I think is really important. One in terms of style, at performance end, but also at youth development end in terms of getting players to understand that as well. So if we're doing a small-sided game, and I've only highlighted the 9 here, because it is just a consideration. You could play any sort of shape you want in this practice, depending on your style. It's just looking at the impact of having the offside line and the halfway line and getting the opposition to defend high. So we're trying to exploit space in behind. So when you talk about relationships, how do we consistently give these pictures where we're showing how we can exploit space in different areas of the pitch? So you're talking about that timing of run there, as you've seen in some of the goals. Mm-hmm. Then by a simple adaptation to the pitch, just putting the offside lines in deeper. So now you'll be able to exploit space in between units. So you mentioned it with the Russia goal earlier, Joe, about, well, you might come 2 or 3 yards off the centre back, and if she doesn't come with you, you can turn and face her up. If she does come with you, you might go and duck in behind. So in this example, it would give you opportunities to drop in. You haven't been followed, but you can get half turn, and then somebody else will provide that running behind, whether it's a midfield runner or 7 or an 11. But what those 2 practices are just simply giving you is recognizing where the space might be on the pitch. You mentioned earlier, Joe, how your game had to adapt to attack crosses, because now you might be getting to cut back areas as you're getting behind fullbacks in deep blocks. So again, simple adaptation to exactly the same session. You may put mannequins in just on the touchline as offside lines, but then allow players to make movements out to come back into that cutback area in possession, so they don't stand out there. They have to time their movements. So you get these types of finishes. Whereas the 8 might get off turn, the 7s come out, ducked in behind the fullback, and now you're getting cutback finishes. Again, just trying to arrive in that area before the defender. So, even with practices like this, that ability to stay away, don't get attracted in too early where you're standing still. Leave the space and then attack with as much pace as you possibly can.
I think there's a great example of that too, isn't there, with the goal with Beth, and Beth crosses that in and Jodie finishes first time.
Yeah.
Is that something then that you practiced, Jodie? Did you see sort of the characteristics of Beth and what she would do as a body position a trigger for you? How does that look as a player inside the box waiting for that cross?
Yeah, exactly. I think a lot of ours come down to the trainings that we did, and what Twose talks about is what we did in preparation. And I think ultimately just going through it at training, and you can start to read characteristics going off of triggers and cues, and I think that's just something naturally over time you just pick up on, knowing if she's going to hit it first time, or I know she's going to take a touchy, she's going to try and take a player on. And I think for that goal in particular, where the ball was, I knew she was going to play it first time. And obviously we've spoken so much about that space, and we've tried it at training. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but I think it's from practices such as these we were able to be on the same page, and it was successful in the match.
Yeah. And again, those practices we showed are really generic practices around your style to help build those relationships. It becomes more individual when you start doing these sort of IDP type sessions, And what I want to stress again here is these sessions are bespoke. So this type of session I might show you, it may look totally different with a different group of players, because you have to adapt your session around the players that you're working with. So you may have players who like to show short and decking behind for cutbacks. You may have players who want to stand still and just by half a yard to cross early from deeper areas. You may have players who, in these clips, you want to get down the sides and finish. You might have players who receive in pockets and combine. So these sessions have to be really bespoke to the players you're working with. The rationale behind the examples I'm showing here is, particularly with Jodie, we work, and Ellen, we work loads about getting down the sides of the back line for finishes. So this would be an example of there's 4 phases to it. We've split it up. If you can imagine, the one phase finishes, the other one started, so it's really fluid. So we just look at sliding the 9 in to start the practice off, where you're coming in and finishing off your left foot, and again that timing of not getting caught offside. And then 2 key things really when we look at that 8 or 10 position, it's getting the understanding of when they receive in front of pressure. So in this example where the 10 can't turn, so imagine it's gone into the 8 or 10 and they tight where they can't turn. So in this example where you're set, it might go wide, then you get the other side of the pressure to bounce, and then it's that cut back area to go and finish. And then the second that finished, you go to the opposite side. Similar things. Starts the same. Now it's a right foot finish. But then in the final phase, if you see here, now we talk about in the 10 position, they've gone higher. So now they receive beyond the pressure. So when they turn, they can play straight away. So we would have gone into the 7, it's come back. Now we're beyond the pressure. She knows it's going to be released quicker. And then you can travel in. And the idea behind that is from a 9 perspective, when we talk about leaving that 2nd 6 yard area vacant, is having a look at what's going on around you. So can the 10 turn and play early? Yeah, she can. So I might have to start my run earlier. Is the 10 turning? No, she's settling because you're going to need to come by. But okay, I'll stay out. But the important thing is how you then manage the movement to arrive in that shaded area as quick as you possibly can as the ball arrives, which is the Argentina goal you spoke about, Jodie.
Twose, I know we spoke quite a bit about some data as well, and how data can inform sort of what we do. How does data help inform some of these practices around the types of finishes that you might want Jodie and Ellen to be exposed to versus what you might get from the opposition? How does data help you and support you do these types of practices?
Well, it'll be more specific to who you're playing against. So, if we know that a team's playing a higher back line, for example, and the data's showing us that we can exploit that area, then this might be a similar practice, but higher up the field, if that makes sense. These practices are whoever we're playing against, really, we're trying to exploit this space behind fullbacks in these cutback areas, because predominantly we dominated possession now in terms of the way the style changed, particularly coming through the World Cup. So yeah, they would be bespoke to who you're playing against. if that makes sense. And
Yeah.
and where the data, comes in is how successful are we at doing it is the other side of it, So when you talk about styles of play and philosophies, etc., at all levels, what's your reason behind doing it? So ultimately at our level, or not our level, at Jodie's level, performance level, at first team level, is to win games. So if we're playing a particular style of football, it's hopefully going to help win more games than we lose. So that's our belief. The stats need to back up that actually it's working,
Yeah. And Jodie, how do you bring in the MDT team then? So you're the 9 in this practice. How do you get sort of Twose to support you, but then also goalkeepers, other MDT to support all this in regards to the data and analysis that they bring?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, I remember doing this practice, Twose, at the World Cup, and it's nice. The one thing I like about this is it is really specific as a forward unit, but you're also working on a couple of different finishes. So the first one is the little through ball, to go central on goal 1v1. The second is a putback. So just having that variety that you are going to face in the match. I think one thing I'd add to this as well is, game by game, it might be you as a 9 with the cutback, but you might actually be the near post run to allow that to clear that space for somebody else. And I think it's just having that understanding with your teammates and also what the game plan is too. Obviously you've done a good job of showing us clips of the opposition we're facing, and we can visually really see where the space is, whether that's for you as a 9 in the cutback area or if that's for somebody else, and you're almost making a selfless run near post to drag a player to open up that space for someone else.
Yeah. And when it's actual opposition, so let's say that you've got your centre halves in there, so let's say Steph might be in there, or you've got your goalkeepers in there, how often do you try and get them to replicate what you might come up against to support you with your decision making in practices like this?
Yeah, quite a lot. I'll give an example of back in 2017 at the Euros. We have Mary Earps, who's the Man United goalkeeper, an England goalkeeper. And at the time, I think she was just the 24th player. She wasn't in the squad. She actually came to help the team. And, bless her, she ended up, getting plummeted with shots all the time. And, she was brilliant with asking, what you want from me, what you need. And I remember there was a game we were going into against Spain. And, I love to watch clips on goalkeepers. And, I love that detail. And, one thing we picked up from that goalkeeper, she loves to fly off her line. So, we're doing these little through balls and, she's like, what you need? I said, well, can you come off your line? Can you just mix up what your decision on ultimately it's going to change our decisions forward and, forces you to scan and take a look. So, I think players are brilliant in the squad in order to do that. I think it's so important to have those conversations, whether it's as players or, as a coach, asking your players to replicate what the opposition are doing, because I think ultimately teams, especially into national team level, teams play very differently, very different styles of play. So if we were to just play each other and the way we play, I don't think we get it out in training what we need. So that's just one example which worked really well, and in the end I ended up scoring a goal in that game in preparation. I knew the goalie was going to fly out, and made a good decision because of the help I got in training.
Yeah. And I think it's the context behind the design of the sessions as well. So even though I got numbers on the pictures there, again, it depends on what players you have. If it's an IDP session and we got defenders in, then it wouldn't look like this because the defenders would be working as well. So with these types of sessions, what's important to stress is the players will rotate around as well. So Jodie might become the 10 or he might become 11, because those traits of running off shoulder to finish, the traits of dropping in, getting off turn and sliding, the traits of running in behind fullbacks to cut back, the 9 might end up doing all those types of things throughout lanes 3 and 4. So you think of when we won the She Believes against Japan, Jode, you run in that channel and you pull it back for the Kaz scores ahead, didn't she?
Yeah.
But actually, it was probably that 7 position there where you were making that run in behind the fullback. So the characteristics or traits that are important to the development of that position will exist in all 3 of these phases, if that makes sense. I think this next one shows an example of it. Maybe if it was more specific, so if you have got defenders, so we haven't animated this, I got to thank Si as well for the animations. He's done this. I'm not clever enough to do the animations on the sessions. So if we got defenders in, you would remember this one as well, Joe. So it would start with the 4 into the 8, and then one of the if you're playing with the 2 to 10 would drop in, and it starts with a 2v2 in the central area, and it's just a 2v2. Defenders defend how they like. Now you can go 2v2, you can go 2v1, you can go 1v1, you can go 1v2. You can mix it up however you want, but you get that opposed attack in that central area where you might slide, or you might take a shot yourself, or you might take the defender on yourself. Soon as that's finished, the next phase goes wide. So what's important when you actually manage a flow with these sessions is to allow the strikers and defenders to get back into shape before the next one goes, because you want to make it really realistic. So in this one, it's just simply into the 8. We'll then play in that sort of weighted pass behind the fullback for a cutback for the 7. And again, obviously, we don't animate all the movements, but you talk to the 7 about, again, just showing and teasing the fullback they want into your feet before they go and dive in behind. Now, when you're attacking that second 6-yard box, obviously you've got two centre backs in there trying to stop you. So I know Jodie spoke about getting across that first defender, or maybe coming off the shoulder of the first defender and finishing in between them. As they come back out now. Sorry, let me just slide back. Sorry, guys. I was doing so well then, I might control. So now it might literally be a ball out to 11 who just shifts. So again, if you've got the type of player who doesn't always run in behind, but can manipulate the ball and deliver from a deeper area, well, if we know that, do you stay out and wait for that early ball and then try and get a run on the centre backs to attack? And then the last phase will be the ball into the 8, and that was a 3v2. And what you can also do with this option is either have the 3v2 within the width of where the mannequins are there, or if the defenders do a really good job, you can put it out to the wide player to then deliver back in. And I think just an important point on practice design, I purposely put 2 keepers in there, because you really have to include the goalkeeper coaches when you're designing these practices, and consider the repetition and impact on the goalkeepers. So if these repetitions are one after the other constantly and the keepers can't even react, well, they get to the point where they don't really do anything. They're just trying to block random shots. Whereas when you reset, it really allows them to develop their game as well. So if there's a slide through pass here, obviously the keeper will be higher and can defend the ball in behind. And then on the next phase, the keepers will switch. Okay, so how we manage the keepers in these practices, I think, is really important. And then just the last one, this looks really busy, right? But it's not. And again, with the numbers, it's just to show examples of positions. But this might just be, again, the strikers working in all positions, because it's a bit of a technical practice into playing forward. But the key really is when you get to the end, how you get those slides in behind and not get caught offside. So if you look at the pattern from the whites, it's just sets. And then the key is the movement of the 9 after the set to not get caught offside. So the use of the mannequin is absolutely key to not be offside. The reason why I've got the zones in there, if you haven't got defenders, is to give the player who's sliding that ball through a guide in terms of the weight of the pass. So if you're over it, the keeper will come out and collect it. So ideally, you're trying to get onto the ball as it arrives in that zone, because then the keeper's guessing, but the keeper can't quite get there. But why I'm showing this practice is, again, you can do it in any way that you want, in any combinations. But we talk a lot to strikers about doing things quickly and doing things realistically. But I think if we set practices up where it's going both ways at the same time, and it's the first team to score, they'll naturally do things quickly. And you remember these sessions, Jode. Mm-hmm. So when it goes live, both teams start at the same time. Now, you're not telling them to play 1 touch, 2 touch, it's entirely up to them. But what you have to do is score before the other team. So it really brings that realism and tempo to the practice. So, if you're forcing and you run too early, you're too eager, then you might be caught offside. if you try to play too quickly in the middle areas, then you might force it and lose control of the ball. If you go too slowly and take too many touches, then the other team would have scored first. So the simple constraint on the practice allows it to be at a high tempo and realistic without the coach shouting on, play quicker or play slower. So the players can really manage it themselves. I don't know what your thought is on that, Jode.
No, absolutely. I love it when there's competitions like that, because you have to be focused. You have to concentrate, and you're right. You're trying to do it as quick as possible, but with quality. And for me, that's what you're doing in a match. So it's a really simple practice which relates to the game.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Susie. And I think that wraps us up really nicely. Of just a massive thanks to both of you, really, for sharing your insights and really giving us that on-pitch insight, that position-specific insight from a player perspective, but also from a coach's perspective, which has been fantastic. And I suppose just sort of wrapping that up for people watching would be, do you actually know what the game demands are for your players and how that'll impact your practices? And do you know your strikers, your number nines inside out? And do they know themselves? Very similar to what Jodie's alluded to today and demonstrated extremely well, as she knows her strengths and weaknesses extremely well. Those are strengths and weaknesses of the people around her, and the importance of those relationships. And I think Twosey's really alluded to it around how he can support that as a coach and get that out within practices as well. So massive thanks for both of you sharing that insight. Thanks very much. And that's a wrap, I think.
Pleasure. Thank you, guys. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.